everyone. Thanks for coming. We have a great turnout, so this is good. Just going to introduce you to our principal, Mr. Linster. He's going to be talking to you about the high school placement results and academics, our curriculum. And then Mr. Jorgensen will talk about transportation, and maybe between the two of them we can answer questions, any of your questions about athletics or anything like that, or anything else that concerns coming into freshman year or registration or anything like that. Right?
Definitely. Okay. All right, well, thank you. Like you said, I'm Jason Linster. This is my 9th year as principal. Prior to that, I was the admissions director here. So my whole 13-year career at SMCC, I've been working with the high school placement test. So I've become pretty knowledgeable about how the test works. Probably for you, the biggest thing is, what does the test tell me about my student right now? So we're gonna dive into that and how that relates to our curriculum as we go forward. So a couple things, just in general, so you understand about the high school placement test. It is required by the Archdiocese of Detroit for admission. It is used by Catholic and other private high schools throughout the country. It's been used for decades. I took the high school placement test in 1993 in Illinois. We have continued to work with the high school placement test as the Archdiocese of Detroit because it has basically been a consistently accurate predictor of course placement, okay? It measures basically where the student is at academically at the time of the test. So one of the things that's been happening the last couple of years is we've had some families who are basically like, well, I'm gonna wait until January or February to take the placement test. It doesn't matter. It knows when you're taking the test. It knows where you should be at that time in the test based on 8th grade material and concepts. So we use that data for class placement purposes and scholarships. Couple things, and these are probably the most, I'd say, biggest things. If you take anything out of tonight, these are the two biggest things that I would want you to focus on. Is the high school placement does not measure probably the two most important things about your son or daughter. One, it doesn't measure how much your student will grow academically over their 4 years at SMCC. We always like to tell about probably the greatest story of this. We had a student years ago who scored in the 9th percentile on the placement test, ended up taking AP chemistry, and is now in a master's program in pharmacy in Ohio. So the high school placement test didn't tell us where she was gonna go in her 4 years. And what it also didn't tell us about her in particular is that she was probably the most hardest working student we may have ever had in this building. So it doesn't measure two things. Like I said, it doesn't measure where they're gonna end up. It also doesn't measure how hard they're gonna work. And the biggest thing I can say about freshman year at SMCC is if you are nervous, or if your son or daughter is nervous about, can I make it at SMCC, do your homework. If you do your homework, you turn in all your work, you will not fail, you will do fine. Our teachers will not allow you to fail if you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing, turning everything in. Freshman and sophomore curriculum is really based, a lot of it is weighted more towards homework and projects and assignments. So if your student struggles on tests, they're gonna have that cushion of all those really good homework grades to help them if they're struggling on tests. So you might have received, there's a couple different versions of the results you might have received with these different things to look at. What we look at when we're looking at course placement is we're looking at national percentile ranks. You're gonna see some different ranks on these tests, but we look at the national percentile ranks. There's local scores, don't worry about the local scores. Those aren't as accurate necessarily as we would want them to be. So we look at the national percentile ranks because, and one of the things you might see, so some of you, depending on where your son or daughter goes to school now, you've either taken the Iowas in the past, the STARS test, some of you might take the MEEP, the NWEA, and you might have gotten the placement test scores and went, oh crap. Like, why is my student scoring in the 85th percentile in STARS or the NWEA and they scored in the 68th percentile here in math? I thought my student was good at math and now I'm questioning everything about everything. This test is a more competitive test. It is normed to less students than those other tests. It is normed to the percentage of kids who are taking tests to get admissions into private high schools in the United States. It is normed basically to about half of what like the Iowa was normed to in terms of the number of students. So it's a more competitive test. The ACT even gets more competitive when they get down to it. So there could be a 10 to 15 point difference, particularly for our students that kind of score in the middle. So when we talk about our curriculum, we're kind of going to talk about quartiles. So we're talking about 75th percentile and above, 75 to 25, 25 and below. So those middle two quartiles is where you might see the sort of shocking drops. If your students is scoring in the 90th percentile, they're going to score in the 90th percentile here most likely, generally happening. There's going to be kids that are always the top kids, but those kids in the middle, what it is there's less kids at the bottom because it's a more competitive environment. So we got to fill out that whole 99 percentile. So some of the students, there's a drop down in that. So that's where you might see some of those different things. So when you look at these, if you receive this, we're looking at a couple different things here. So like I said, we're worried about the national percentile ranks here in our cognitive skills and our basic skills sections. So verbal, quantitative, reading, math, and language. And then if you look down, if you want to dive deeper, some of you are educators in this room, so if you're really into it, you can look at kind of in the different sections, you know, what were they testing, how many questions were there, how many items did they get right, and then where were they in that spectrum of low to slightly below average, average, slightly above average to high. And that's where you can kind of see potentially when you look and you can go back to your school and ask them, well, you know, my students, you know, struggled in weight, length, and dry, you know, of dry liquids and like dry substances and liquids. Well, your 8th grade teacher at your school, like, in our curriculum, we don't get to that till the 3rd quarter. So there might be some areas where they struggle where it could be totally explained by the way the curriculum is set up at individual schools, or it just might be an area where they might need work. Okay, so if you have real specific questions about some of the performance, we can definitely set up an appointment and talk through all that. But this kind of gives you an idea, and these sort of generally just in this basic skills section. The verbal and quantitative sections are more sort of testing your vocabulary and also how you think, how you process. So like the quantitative skills are more some of the think through math skills than just in the math section we're testing like, all right, how do you do root exponents and all those things. So your sort of cognitive skills are more of a projection about your academic abilities versus the basic skills are what are you at right now, and that's where we get the sort of grade equivalence, which is these GEs that you'll look at. We don't give GEs in that area, they give GEs in these subject areas. So like when we look at this, like I said, when we look at that raw score in the national percentile rank, if they scored in the 64th percentile, that means they scored higher than 64% of the students in that national norm setting. Like I said, more competitive than the Iowa STARS or MSTEP, it's norm to less students. That's the big thing to focus on if you're concerned about the scores. So when we look at sort of, when I talk about norm reference, that refers to standardized tests that are designed to compare and rank test takers in relation to one another. So it's a direct comparison to the other students historically and that year who are taking that test, okay? Basically, we look at there's a hypothetical average student, and then we compare them against the other people who have taken it. Something that you look at and you're concerned about when parents look at these grade equivalents, that compares the performance of one student with the average performance of students at other grade levels. Okay, so this is the big thing to think about. The 8th grade student scores what they call a grade equivalent of 10.4 in a math subtest. This does not mean that the student is capable of doing 10th grade math, okay? It means that the student can do 8th grade math as well as the average high school sophomore, okay? So don't get so, again, it's a comparison versus, they're not saying if you scored, you're not, in reading you got a 6.8. Oh my gosh, my student's reading at 6th grade level. No, they're not, they're just reading at a comparative level to some 6th graders. So obviously that's on the below end of the average, but it's not something to necessarily freak out about. And I know these grade equivalents have been massive source of stress and frustration and questions for parents. That's why I like to hit on those. So again, this is one data point. So when we talk about course selection, if you have other standardized tests that you want us to consider when we talk about course selection, we welcome that, obviously. Because we also get, particularly for the schools that are now offering more than one test period of it's like the STARS, for example, at some of the Catholic schools, you're taking STARS tests multiple times per year. So obviously we want to look at that. We want to look at your growth data to give us an accurate picture of where your student is at as well. So these are not the be all and end all. We use them to guide our courses decisions, but again, they're not the be all and end all. So I don't want you to all to, there's a lot of, I know, stress and anxiety when it comes to the test scores, so that's why I want to hit on that. So we use, like I said, the HSPT for class purposes for 9th grade only, okay? So when your student gets in our building, their academic performance in those classes dictate what happens sophomore, junior, and senior year, okay? So can start out in one level and move up. Also, something to think about when I talk about these 3 levels, these are not tracks. So some of us, when we went through high school, it's like there's an honors track and there's a remedial track. These are levels of basically, so we have students who might be in an honors level 1 course and a concepts level in another course. Generally, the size of our school, we're nimble enough to create a schedule that fits your students' academic ability. So we're not gonna hold them back in one subject because they struggle in another subject. So we may have, honors student in honors English who's in concepts math. But basically we look at concepts, it's generally for students with low scores in specific subject areas. So math, English, and science on the freshman level are our concepts classes. And basically what that is, I'll talk about math a little bit differently, but it basically, we slow down the curriculum a little bit, we really focus on fundamental skills. Our college prep is our sort of middle level classes. Most SMCCs fall in this category. That's kind of your 25th to 75th percentile students. The concepts generally the 25th percentile and below. Honors and AP, generally students who score in the top 25% in most of the subject areas on the high school placement test. So when we look at math in particular, we use 2 sections of data for the math. We use the math section itself and the quantitative section. So basically what we do is we add those 2 numbers up. We add that national percentile rank up. If they're less than 30, we recommend that your student go into our concepts math curriculum. What that is, basically we take freshman algebra, we take that out over 2 years to algebra concepts A as a freshman, algebra concepts B as a sophomore, concepts geometry as a junior, and concepts algebra 2 as a senior. You have to get through algebra 2 to graduate in the state of Michigan to get a general education diploma. So we get you through that. We also do, we work with students throughout those 4 years because obviously our goal would be to have your student take algebra 2 as a junior. That because there's a huge chunk of the ACT, the standardized test that all of our students take is junior year, and algebra 2 is on that. So we have a lot of situations where we have students who get into our concepts algebra class, they do really well. We work with them to double them up sophomore year, taking that algebra concepts B and then geometry to get them into the algebra 2 their junior year. So again, it's not it can be a 4-year track. It's not a 4-year track if your student does well in it. Basically, all of our other students take our college prep level algebra. We do not have an honors algebra class in the freshman level. If you are taking algebra right now, as an 8th grader, if your student is, if they go to MCS, St. Charles or St. Joe's, they tested with us in December. They'll test it with us again in June. If your student is at another school and they're taking 8th grade algebra, we will invite them in June to come and sit for our 1st and 2nd semester final exams in our algebra class. If they score above an 80 composite average between those 2 semester long exams, we put them in honors geometry as a freshman. So basically we don't give high school credit for courses taken in elementary school, but we will place you up on that next level if that's what you've done. So that's something when you get to your freshman registration appointment, if you're at Trinity or Jefferson or Monroe Public or anywhere else,
Sorry.
come on in, no problem. Then that would just be, you would just come and sit with us for those tests. English, we use verbal, reading, and language, the language score, so 3 sections. Add those up if you're less than 105. So if you think about that, you're basically 30th percentile and below on all 3 sections. You're going to be in our Language Arts 9 class, which is our Concepts English class. Sort of the difference with that would be let's say instead of reading 5 novels as a freshman, we read 3 in our Concepts class. Instead of reading the entire play of Romeo and Juliet, the students in the concept read excerpts. They'll use audio. They'll really focus in on very specific, plot, theme, setting, all those things, symbolism. Really focus in on those skills that are necessary. Our Concepts English curriculum only lasts 2 years here. So actually by junior year, all of our students end up in the college prep curriculum or above. Honors Literature, you need a language total of 255 or more. So that's generally the 80th percentile and above on those 3 sections. Science, we have Foundations of Biology. We use the reading and language totals for those, same as Concepts English. Honors Biology, we look for basically placement test scores of 75th percentile composite, so average all those out. And then there is an optional science section that all of your students took on the HSPT here in the Archdiocese of Detroit. We look for a 75 in that as well for that honors science class. Foreign language, we require 2 years of foreign language taken at SMCC to meet the high school graduation requirement. If they're taking it as an 8th grader at MCES, they'll be invited to be in French or Spanish too, but they have to take French or Spanish 2 and 3 to finish the requirement here. We also offer a placement test for our public school students as well to put them into a higher level, but you need to take 2 years in the building. Generally, we're looking for, if you're above the 25th overall composite in the placement test, we invite you to choose French or Spanish or potentially an online foreign language if you're interested in something different. We have several other options through Michigan Virtual School. We do recommend for students who are scoring below the 25th percentile composite that they wait until sophomore year to start foreign language. Fits in their schedule easily, makes the freshman year a little bit easier in that transition. We actually, for the first time this year, offered what we call a Foundations of Foreign Language, so a concepts level Spanish class to take as well. You take 2 years of that. So if your student struggles in sort of the language arts area, we recommend that. Some of our students who are under interactive sport program have IEPs, 504s, who struggle with memorization, things like that. We have that program for them now as well. So we do offer all the way through Spanish 4. Spanish 4 is an honors course. We offer all the way through French 4. French 4 is dual enroll with Monroe County Community College. So our French students end up actually with 8 college credits when they finish our French program. So if that's something that you're interested in, then making the decision to take French would be advisable. Social Studies World History is a 9th or 10th grade class. We highly recommend even our honors students wait until their 10th grade year to take that. It is a very rigorous course. Also, to get you ready for AP US History, we want you to take that as a sophomore, so you have those classes back to back. Concepts World History in the 10th grade level, Concepts US History at the 11th grade level. No concepts on our senior year schedule. If you want to take World History in the 9th grade, you have to score above the 50th percentile. And if you want to take honors World History as a freshman, you need to be in that 255 range, the same as honors English. So what happens is all the course descriptions can be found on our website in our course description book. You will basically have an opportunity in March to come register, and what you'll be sent is this form. I'll go back to that other slide in a second, but you'll be sent with this form where you would kind of make the choices for your student. We'll send a letter in the next week 2 weeks?
Yeah, about next 2 weeks, I think.
There'll be a letter in the next week that basically is a summary of what I have just said in the last 15 minutes to look over in terms of the scores for the HSPT. But you will come up with, you will look at this, you will make determinations on your student's interest. Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Fulver, and myself will go through every single enrolling student and fill out the same thing. And then our freshman registration appointment is when we sit down and come to an agreement on your classes for freshman year. We do take parental input on the levels. If you're scoring in the 13th percentile, you know, in English and you want to be in honors English, that's going to be a tough sell. But if you're in the 60th percentile and you know your son or daughter reads 5 books a month, then we'll talk about moving them up to that honors level English class. So again, those scores are our guidelines, but in terms of the individual students and parents, we do have that's not hard and fast, right? You are the primary educators of your students. You know your sons or daughters better. I will say the one advantage when it's your second or third student to come through our building, we generally also kind of lean on the parents a little bit more in those situations because they've been through our curriculum, they know our curriculum, and they know what their students can handle. So if you're coming in and it's your third student, and you're telling me that your student can handle honors classes and the other siblings have handled honors classes and you know how much work that is, we're going to have that conversation and sort of lean in your direction. Just because it's, again, you have that experience. You've been through that. You've been up with your student at night helping them with their homework or seeing how much work it is. And if you can tell, what your student can handle, that's definitely something to think about. So when you're looking at this, the freshman schedule, you choose 1 English course, 1 math course, 1 science course. All of our freshmen take both semesters of our theology. Then every freshman takes health. We have a freshman computer class that we offer. We offer a session in the summer. A lot of people take it because they want to be able to get a study hall. You can pretty much get a study hall your freshman year, even if you take computers in the school year, depending on what other classes you take. And then it would be foreign language, and there's also fine arts, music, and then obviously there's a choice of study halls. If your student has a 504 and IEP, receives academic accommodations from their current school, you would be in a structured study hall with our academic support team. Or if your student has generally test scores below the 10th percentile, we would recommend that structured study as well. A study hall is just a 48-minute period monitored by a teacher for them to get work done. The only difference is the structured study hall, we capped that at 12 students, and that's where our students go and take, if they have extended time for testing, if they have test retakes they're allowed to take, that's what they work. And then Mrs. Schaefer and Mrs. Johnson get really involved with them in terms of helping them track assignments, tests, quizzes, all those different things. We will be releasing our summer computer dates as well in that letter. We also offer a summer math workshop that isn't for academic credit, but it really works on strengthening those pre-algebra skills. That's in July. Lisa Sawatsky, who teaches algebra and middle school math at MCS, does that class for us with the curriculum that Mr. Flint has worked on with her. So it gives them a lot of time to sort of brush up on those skills. And it's like a 4-day-a-week class for a couple weeks in July in the morning. So we do generally build our summer classes around the summer sports activities that go on. So if your student is lifting for football or running for cross country or whatever, that gets done before these classes start usually. So, but we look at if you are requesting a class that doesn't fit our recommendations, all we would like to see is bring in grades, but also if you have other, like I said, other standardized test scores that tell us a different story, that those other standardized test scores carry the most weight with us. Because it's hard for us to judge, okay, what's an A at Airport versus what's an A at St. Charles versus what's an A at St. Pat's versus what's an A at St. Joe's. We get students from like 25 different grade schools, grades are all different at those places. So, some schools are using standard-based grading now. So what's a 5 versus an A somewhere else? So we really look at those standardized test scores to tell us where your student should be, again, on the freshman level. After the freshman level, the grades in those individual classes. So if your student gets put in, you know, college prep level biology and wants to be an honors science, get an A. Get an A in that college prep course, you're getting recommended for the honors class the next year. So again, they only work to get you in, and once you're in with us, your performance is what those test scores fade into the background. Your performance in the classroom is what guides our future course selections and recommendations that our teaching staff makes for your students. Okay, any questions? I talked a lot, sorry. But any sort of general questions, if you have specific questions about your student, I will hang around at the end. Or if you want to set up a time to meet, we can do that as well if you want to take a little bit more time than just chatting here. But any sort of questions about the curriculum, the high school placement test, how we pick courses, anything like that? All right. So either I bored you to death or I was too thorough. All right.
We answered every question.
It's the last time I had to do this.
I know, it's a swan song, so that's why we had to put it on film.
Exactly.
Here. The only thing I'd comment on or maybe add to what you said that sometimes becomes a question a little later for parents is a lot of times how many of you come from schools other than our Catholic feeder schools? Anybody tonight? Okay. So sometimes we get questions about the ability of our students to take college level courses while they're in high school, dual enrollment, and the like. We always answer that question by saying it's on a case-by-case basis. And the reason for that is when you hear about, well, we offer 50 dual enrolled courses. Well, that's great, but when you're coming in as a freshman in high school, you really don't know which of those are going to be applicable to you or not. So our approach, rather than having one or two partners to do that, is we want to talk to you as parents and your student individually and find out what their specific interests are. Because what we've learned over the years about dual enrolled credits is that it's different in every case as to where they want to go to college. And every college you can imagine has a different policy regarding what they accept, how they accept it, what credits they'll assign, what they won't. We've been to visits at universities where we've had admissions staff stand in front of us, and we had a kid who took every AP class imaginable and got 4s or 5s in every one of those tests, and this place stood up and said, we don't give any credit for AP classes. And he was crushed because he loaded up his schedule with AP classes. But it got him into the university.
But we want you to we want you to take all of them.
We want you to take all of them, but we're not going to give you credit. Now think about it for a second. Why would a university do that, right? Because if they're not giving you credit for classes, college classes that you took on the high school level, they can make you take them in college and charge you for them, right? So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take the dual enroll class, but we want to walk with you and make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into and that you're not setting yourself up for disappointment when you don't get that credit. There are schools that accept those credits. I have a son at Michigan State. I made him take his 4th year of French here. He did not want to take French 4, every bone in his body. He argued with Mr. Linster even. He went around me and tried to get the principal to, he told me. He took it, he ended up getting 8 credits. That count as an elective. They don't count towards his major, but he's got half of his elective requirements filled before he sets foot on campus. So there are advantages to it. But instead of coming at you and saying, here's our list of all of these dual enrolled opportunities, we're going to come to you and say, what's your student interested in doing? What kind of classes do they want to take? And it might be that we are going to go out and find a university partner to provide a class that's specific to that area. We've done dual enrolled opportunities with lots of different places. We've taught them on our campus. We're losing our law class professor. Mr. Linster taught a class in criminal justice that was a dual enrolled class with the community college. We're going to see if we can get him in. I'm trying to find every excuse I can to get him back next year. But we're going to, so there's opportunities like that. Know that that's there and ask your counselors if you have concrete ideas about what that might look like for you or your students. Ask your counselors right away so that we have that on the radar screen for your students. Okay, questions on that? All right. I get to talk about probably what most of you might have questions on, and that's tuition and financial aid and transportation. We joke about the fact that this is like a marriage. I raise it, he spends it. So now, you know, that's not really true anymore, right? I mean, I spent way more money this year than you have with all the facility stuff. So, tuition and financial aid. How many of you have applied through fax for financial aid? Okay, and how many of you still need to do that? Anybody? Okay, that saves a bunch of words tonight that I don't have to say about how to go through the fax application process. All of you who have applied, thank you. You're ahead of the game. And you will qualify for maximum financial aid awards that your application qualifies you for based on the fact that you applied this early. So it will give us a chance to walk through that. A couple of basics around how we handle tuition and financial aid. Our tuition is based on the cost to educate. So if you take our tuition, which is $12,200, and multiply it times our enrollment at the beginning of the year, which was $346, you have our operating budget. Congratulations, you just cracked the code. Okay? I will tell you that this model is based on a small private college model of funding, cost-based tuition. We, just like the colleges and universities, private colleges and universities, understand the majority of our families cannot afford to pay the full cost of tuition, particularly if you have multiple children, particularly if you have multiple children in private schools to begin with. So, the goal in this is to create an equitable funding model that has families being able to pay what they can afford to pay. And we take into account several things. When we look at the tuition amount, when we look at our current family base, 70% of our families pay less than the cost to educate, which means they receive some form of assistance from the school. The 30% who do pay the full cost do so because they either have not applied for aid or because their incomes are sufficient and that allow them to be able to afford to pay the full cost. Okay. We get questions like, well, you know, I make a good income, I know I won't qualify. If you have questions or concerns about what you qualify for, what you might qualify for or not, please come and see me. Make an individual appointment. Now's the time to do that. February 1st begins financial aid month for me. That's when I close my door and I don't answer when Mrs. Flint contacts me or Mr. Goda contacts me, because I'm in on Spreadsheet Central looking at all the information that's come in from your applications and taking the pot of money that we have allocated for freshman financial aid and beginning to allocate it to individual families. Okay, so we have a couple of rules of thumb that you may have heard me mention before. So first rule of thumb, no family will pay more than 10% of their adjusted gross income to private school tuition. So for those of you who have big families, and I don't mean like Mazarin-sized families, 9, 10, 12 kids, okay? That's like the past generation. But if you're like the modern incarnation of large families like the Linsters with 4 children, we're gonna take into account the tuition that you pay for all of your students, okay? So let's just use a simple example. Let's say you're a family of 5. You have 3 children enrolled in Catholic schools, and you as a family make $100,000 a year in adjusted gross income. That's that bottom number on the front form of your 1040 form. We take that number, the starting point for us, we take that number, we take 10%, $10,000, and we subtract whatever you're paying for the other. Let's say your oldest is coming and you have 2 others at private elementary schools. We take the top and we subtract it, and whatever you're paying at the private elementary for the other 2, so if it's next door, it's about 7, right? I'm looking at some of our multiple family for 2, it's about 7 this year, I think. Maybe it'll probably be more next year, right? Mr. Rubin keeps raising the tuition. So it's about 7, right? So you're not gonna pay more than $3,000 in tuition costs at SMCC in order to make sure that we keep you under that 10% rule. Okay, so that's rule of thumb. We start there before we look at your individual cases. The maximum amount of financial aid that we provide covers 80% of tuition. So there are some cases where, you know, if a family has a need that says it's $1,000, well, we're gonna charge you 20% of the cost to educate here. And we'll find other ways to work with you and make it affordable if you have larger families with multiple kids. But does that make sense? That's the 10% rule. Not gonna pay more than 10%. The majority of our families pay between 5 and 7% of their adjusted gross income. So that gives you something to shoot at. It does that. It also allows you to think ahead and say, we don't want to enroll your oldest child only to have you decide my younger ones can't, we can't afford to send my younger ones either to the grade school they're attending currently, or they can't follow an SMCC. When we're saying yes to the first student, we're hopefully saying yes to your entire family. Okay, so that's the other part of the equation. In total, the 70% of our families who receive financial aid will share in $1.3 million in scholarship assistance from SMCC. Okay, so that's the way the funding model works. And then my job and Mrs. Cicero's job, with help from Mr. Goda and a few other people around here, our job then is to turn around and to raise $1.3 million a year and to offset that financial aid. And we do that from a variety of sources and a variety of efforts. And it's why we have things like parent service hours, because those fundraisers are what helps generate the revenue that helps us be able to continue to award that much in financial aid. Questions on that kind of basic framework? Okay. The second thing you need to know is that if you've applied by now, which it seems like all of you have, then you're going to get a letter from us by the end of February, the first week of March, that's going to tell you exactly what you've qualified for in financial aid and what your balance will be due for next year. We will have set tuition for next year. Okay, the board met this past week. We had discussions around tuition and financial aid structure for next year. They've empowered the finance committee, and they're meeting in this couple coming weeks here, and the finance committee is going to set tuition. I'm going to tell you that it's probably going to go up between 2 and 3%. That's what we've kind of gotten ourselves into the model, where the tuition increase is about 2 to 3% a year. Okay, and we're going to announce that increase and then share information with our rising freshman families of what you qualify for in financial aid. That's going to give you about 3 weeks before Mrs. Flynn's going to want you to sign up for a registration appointment. So before you come in and pick classes and make that next big step towards becoming an SMCC student, you're going to know exactly what your bill is. Okay, and if there's problems or concerns, once you get that communication, that's when you contact me and say, can we come in and talk? Can we chat over the phone? Can we talk about this? There's something maybe you didn't see in our application, or hey, what were you thinking? You missed this whole thing, you know, that kind of stuff. Okay, questions on that? Okay, I know that's probably the most nerve-wracking part for the parents, is like, okay, just help me understand how I can afford this, right? Okay. Once we establish the tuition amount, the tuition balance, and you register for classes, we won't bill you until that's taken place, okay? So until you register for classes, we won't actually send you a bill. We don't make you pay anything for that. Once you're billed, we ask for a deposit of 10% of your balance. And that 10% of your balance comes off your bill and decreases your bill by the balance of it by 10%. We ask for that deposit by July 1st. For the following school year. If that's an issue or a problem for you, you can call us up, let us know. We don't charge families who have to pay over time, so we have payment plans. We don't charge families a service fee. We've been able, over the course of years, to have a really good relationship with what was Monroe Bank and Trust, now First Merchants, and so we don't get charged a fee for the payment plans we create, the ACH plans we create with them. So if you need to make monthly payments, quarterly payments, any sort of payment structure, we're not going to charge you a fee to do that. Instead, what we do is we incentivize families to pay their balances in full. So if you have a balance of $4,000 and are in a position where you can pay that balance in full before the school year starts, we'll give you an additional $400 off of your bill. Helps us with cash flow, incentivizes people to save and pay that down, but doesn't punish families who aren't in a position to be able to do that. Okay, so there's no charge to pay over time. It's just an incentive if you can pay the balance in full. The other part about managing our own payment plans is that you don't have to be locked into a certain payment plan. So if what works best for you and your household is 10 monthly payments, take your balance, divide it by 10, here it goes. We'll set up that payment plan for you. Mrs. Riggs will administer that, and that's the way we'll go. If you say, I've got a payment due at MCS that I want to pay off first, and then I want to set up a structure.
Check the University of Alabama.
Check the University of Alabama. No, Alabama gets its money last. Okay, you pay us first, not Alabama. If they didn't beat Notre Dame so bloody every time, then maybe I'd feel different about
It's rough having an SEC.
I tell you. So if you have that payment, let's say to St. Charles or to St. Joseph Erie or St. Pat's, or let's say you yourself are enrolled in college classes and you've got college tuition that you owe at the beginning of the semester, and you need a different kind of payment plan, and say, I really can't afford, if it's $4,000, I can't afford an additional $400 a month, then we can break it up in a different looking payment plan. We have lots of families who work in the automotive industry where there's bonuses tied out to certain times of the year, and then everybody's favorite, tax return season. So the joke around here is always, don't talk to Mr. Jorgensen about anything costing money in February or March, because nobody's paying their tuition bills, everybody's recovering from Christmas. But once we get to April and everybody files their tax returns, everybody starts paying off their tuition balances. We can create a customizable payment plan that fits how cash flow looks in your household. So if there's a bonus payment at work that comes in December, and you want to push some of that bonus, you want to push some of that payment off until then, we can do that. Mrs. Riggs is great about creating those custom plans with you and working with you to that regard. We don't charge a fee to do that. And it can be as flexible as it needs to be for you and your families. Questions on that payment plans? Okay. The tuition cost, the $12,200 this year, is as best as we can an all-in cost. Okay, so that cost now includes it includes everything except your iPad, which we're talking about rolling that into the total cost as well, because now every student, before we had this thing where freshmen could bring their own iPads if they had them, and this, well, the reality is the generations of iPads are turning over quicker now, and so we have everybody come in and buy an iPad their freshman year from us. So if you are thinking about a graduation gift for your 8th grader and want to cheat a little bit, do I have any 8th graders? Look at a couple 8th graders in here, so close your ears. If you want to cheat and buy them an iPad as a graduation gift, we'll sell it to you now. Contact us, we'll get you the iPad, it'll be a graduation gift, you'll have it in time for that. But we have you buy your iPad from us. We have you pay a $75 self-insurance fee. That gives you one free oops. How many? I see a few current parents in the rooms. How many of you had children who have had to avail themselves of the iPad insurance? My freshman at Michigan State, his freshman year of high school, before August. 2. He got his first one in May, broke it. Got a second one, broke it. The insurance paid for the first. He used his graduation money to pay for 8th grade graduation money to pay for the second. So, okay, so $75 a year is worth it. Is all I'm trying to make. Is all I'm trying to say. Outside of the iPad, there's also we have a fundraising obligation for our parents to sell $300 worth of our Bill Applin Mega Raffle tickets. These are tickets. This is your way to get even with all the people you work with who have always made you buy candy bars or raffle tickets or something else. This is your chance to get even with them. You can sell to them. You can sell to family members. If you really struggle to know who to sell to, you can contact us, and we'll put you in touch with alums who buy every year, and we can connect you with them and help you with those sales if that's the situation for your family. But that helps us. Your participation in selling those tickets goes towards the goal of selling 4,000 raffle tickets, which generates about $160,000 in revenue for the school over the course of the year. So that's the other tuition obligation. The only other separate fee from the iPad that gets applied to tuition, that gets applied if you choose to, is transportation, and that's the other subject I'm going to talk about briefly tonight. Are there any questions about tuition and financial aid before I move on to that? Okay, and Mrs. Flint needs to go because speaking of transportation, she's got a horde of kids next door that need to be transported home.
Thank you all for coming.
So we help provide transportation to and from school if you live outside of the Monroe Public School District. If you live inside MPS, our schedule currently matches that of the Monroe Middle School. So you are able to ride the Monroe Middle School bus. It takes you over to Monroe Middle School, located behind St. John's, between 5th and 6th Street. And then there's a shuttle bus, a transfer bus that brings you here to the back right behind the school in the mornings. You can do the reverse in the afternoons. The shuttle takes you over and then you ride home. If you live inside Monroe Public Schools. If you live outside of the Monroe Public School District, then you can avail yourself of our transportation system. There'll be a form that comes with all the freshman forms. Comes a little bit later than the registration packets. But if you're interested, please fill the form out, send it in to us, and we'll get you in the works for transportation services come the fall. It's a pretty flexible system. You can ride both ways to and from school. You can ride one way. I need to have my child ride in the morning, but in the afternoon they're playing boys soccer in the fall. So we're only riding one way. We're going to prorate the fee to reflect how much you ride. I'm not a fall sport athlete, but I'm a basketball player, a girls basketball player in the winter, so I'm not gonna ride home in the winter. We'll adjust the rates based on that. We adjust the routes basically with each sport season, and we're also doing a lot of work with a startup out of Ann Arbor, out of their accelerator lab at U of M called Fleet Lab. We're transitioning to a mixed fleet of buses and what will be gasoline powered vans first. We have our first e-van, so eventually there'll be electric vans. And these are creating smaller, shorter, faster routes. So those of you that live outside of the Monroe area, if you live in Bedford, if you live up near West Road, we go as far north this year as West Road in Trenton to pick up kids. You won't have to get up quite so early to catch the bus or the van. The vans move a little faster because the routes are shorter and faster. So we're doing as much as we can to help improve the efficiency of that transportation system. Those vehicles then also transport our students for after school activities as well. And so we're working on that. If any of you are looking for a side hustle, you can become a van driver for us. We're always looking to train van drivers now. You do not have to have a CDL license to become one of our van drivers, unlike the buses. Part of this move is because it's so difficult to find bus drivers right now, that we're actually moving to a mixed fleet and having vans. If you're a parent who's going to be riding in the game every time, and your kid loves you and isn't embarrassed by you, your child isn't embarrassed by them at this point, then you can say, "Hey, I'll drive the van," right? Because you get paid to drive to the game. You're going to get in for free because you're the bus driver. Okay, it's a good deal. I'm telling you. Talk to Jared Jansen. He's the head of transportation. He'll hook you up. We'll get you trained and on your way to being a van driver for SMCC. Okay. Questions on transportation?
What time is the doors open? Like I work by 7:30. Like if I came in the morning, drop them off 7:15. I know the school doesn't start till 7.
Our office opens at 7.
So
Office opens at 7.
If I was drop them off like 7:15, it wouldn't be too early. Because like at Mason now, the doors don't open until like 7:10. You can't come in I just didn't know if there's a certain time like the doors would be open for the students, or if it.
Our school office opens at 7. Students can hang out in the lobby downstairs. A lot of times they come up in the hallways and just sit by their lockers. They can get in here once the space is open, and this space is usually open between 6:30 and 7. Our maintenance staff gets in at 6:30. It's a race between Mr. Cousineau and I as to who gets here first between 5 and 5:30 between him and I. He beats me usually because he's usually been up for an hour and a half to 2 hours, so he's like a 3:30 a.m. riser. So, that means vampire. I understand. But 7 a.m. Anything after 7 a.m. is easy. After school works the same way. We have a lot of students who will spend time here after school. They're either up here in the media center, or more commonly they're downstairs in Founders Hall hanging out with their friends. They're all doing their homework. That's right away. They're right on homework.
We now have 72 cameras in the building, so
we do have a new security system in the building.
Eyes on them, so
we have eyes on them wherever they are now, inside or outside the building.
So it's okay to bring them in early or
Correct.
to leave them?
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. Okay.
this place is rocking until 8:30, 9 o'clock every night, pretty
I
much.
was
So
gonna say,
Any more questions on transportation? Anything else in the universe you want to ask?
any questions in general?
What's the number incoming class on that students?
Right now, we're looking at a freshman class between 80 and 85.
Our enrollment's been pretty stable between 335 and 350 for the last 7 years. So when you look at some of the other Catholic schools in the area, we feel pretty blessed to be that number, because some of the other schools are seeing a decline, but we've been pretty solid in that number for quite a while now.
So obviously one of the big benefits of that is smaller class sizes. That absolutely has an impact on the learning that your students are able to do. If we can keep class sizes down, It's much more interactive for them, particularly on the concepts and on the honors level. Those classes tend to be even smaller than, you might have a freshman class that's 26 or 27 because we've only got 4 sections of that class offered, and so we have to like figure out.
If I try to put a 31st desk in a classroom, they come with the pitchforks and the tornadoes. 30 is kind of our max limit in a given class.
But in most of our honors and concepts classes range between 10 and 15, so it's kind of a range.
How do freshmen find out about sports, in particular the non-traditional sports? I mean, obviously I'm.
So at
Small school, but-
freshman registration, there's an interest form that you'll fill out
Okay.
for all fall sports. So basically, you can indicate interest for multiple sports. You know, if you're, we're trying out for volleyball, but if we don't make volleyball, we're gonna run cross country, or we're gonna go swimming. You can put your name down for as many sports as possible. That gets you on the contact list for the coach, and the coach will be able to reach out to the parent, and let them know, okay, this is what we're doing this summer. These are the different things that are going on. But for example, once you're a fully registered student in March, you're allowed to do certain things here in the building that the non-registered student who's named here cannot. So, you know, weight facilities, all that stuff. But no, it's a jump. And then what happens in the fall, generally late September, early October, our athletic director sends out another Google form to all the students again with the winter sports. And a lot of our coaches will then hold informational meetings before school, after school, during homeroom. You know, like Coach Wyndham will come in a homeroom a couple weeks before basketball season starts. Anybody, and then we announce anybody interested in basketball come down. Coach Wyndham will introduce himself, talk about the program. This is when conditioning starts. This is when practices start. You know, all that stuff. So plenty of time, you know, to get going. So
It's a good point regarding freshman registration. So you're going to get an appointment time that you'll schedule. We'll send out a sign up genius that'll allow you to go in and pick a time to meet with a counselor that works in your schedule. When you do plan on arriving 5 to 10 minutes before, because we're going to have a Google form regarding sports. We might have a couple other things. There's a checkoff list that we do. So there's a registration desk. So when you come 5, 10, 15 minutes early, you can take care of all that business before you do the registration.
generally, when we look at the freshman registration appointments, it would be you're going to see our college counselors are split up by alphabet. I would say I'm the third person for that. I'd say if your student has significant academic needs, or you want to talk about classes that may not fit necessarily the test scores, just schedule an appointment with me, because then we just cut out the middleman going through Mrs. Johnson or Mrs. Fulberry. Just meet with me. It makes it a lot easier. We can go through everything. So I have the same set of number of appointment slots as them. But if you're just going to be, you know, if the test scores look at what if your student's going to be in college prep, and that's good, I would recommend choosing Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Fulberry based on your letter of the alphabet, just to start that relationship, because they're going to be your person for the next 4 years. Starting in March, then this summer when we meet with all of our freshmen, are invited to a college, our sort of college advising kickoff, where you learn our 4-year college advising plan and the model that we use throughout their 4 years here, and really develop that relationship with Mrs. Johnson.
That's usually right before school starts in August, right?
Couple sets, one in June, a couple in July.
Is that something that you'd want the student to come with as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. We would want the student at freshman registration, as well as that meeting in the summer. Because also the big thing with freshman registration is when we get to like electives, and you're like, well, do you want to take 3-dimensional art or intro to art, and then we can kind of talk about what that means. Then they can make that choice, because in the end, you may think and then what happens when the student's out there, then I get a call a week later, oh, I showed them the thing and now they want to do this. So generally we get that input from them as well.
Other questions? Topics we haven't covered tonight. Okay.
All right. Well, that's all we have.
We're going to be around afterwards,
yeah.
if individual questions about your student, and otherwise look for a mailing from us in probably about 2 weeks. That'll kick off the next part of the process. Anytime you have kids' questions or concerns, just Mrs. Flint is your primary contact. She's the triage nurse, but you can always call Mr. Linster or myself as well to ask your questions. Okay, great. Thanks so much for coming.